The hospital door opened. Maureen O'Hara stepped inside. And John Wayne spoke one sentence, a sentence that has echoed through Hollywood's conscience for 46 years. May 1979. UCLA Medical Center. Room 342. The Duke was dying. Not the way he'd died on screen 100 times, quick, heroic, gun in hand, sunset behind him. This death was slow. Quiet. The kind that strips away mythology and leaves only a man in a hospital bed, oxygen tube in his nose, body reduced to something he no longer recognized. The lung cancer had won. Everyone knew it. The doctors had stopped pretending otherwise 3 weeks ago. The treatments had failed. The legendary constitution that had carried John Wayne through 50 years of films, through falls and injuries and punches thrown for real cameras, had finally surrendered. He'd asked for few visitors. His children came. A handful of old friends. Men he'd worked with who understood that you don't make a spectacle of dying. You do it with whatever dignity you have left. But when Maureen O'Hara called asking if she could visit, Wayne had said yes without hesitation. They'd made 5 films together. The Quiet Man, Rio Grande. The Wings of Eagles. McLintock. Big Jake. 40 years of partnership. She was the only woman in Hollywood who'd ever matched him scene for scene, never backing down, never playing soft when the script needed fire. She'd also been the only person who'd known the truth he'd carried since 1942. The nurse opened the door. Maureen walked in carrying nothing, no flowers, no gifts, no cameras. Just herself, hair touched with gray now but still carrying that unmistakable presence that had made her a star. Wayne's eyes were closed. The oxygen machine hummed softly. And Ford dripped into his arm. His hands, those massive hands that had thrown 1,000 punches and held 1,000 rains, rested on the white hospital blanket, smaller somehow, the veins prominent. Maureen pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed and sat down. She didn't speak. Just sat there, waiting. After maybe 30 seconds, Wayne opened his eyes. Looked at her. A small smile touched his mouth. Maureen. Hello, Duke. His hand moved slightly on the blanket. She reached forward and took it. Her fingers wrapped around his palm, and for a moment they just sat there holding hands like 2 old friends who'd run out of things to prove. Wayne didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice hoarse, each word costing him effort. Before I can't anymore. You don't have to tell me anything, Maureen said softly. Yes, I do. He squeezed her hand weakly. Because you're the only one who knows. And when I'm gone, someone needs to remember the truth. To understand what he meant, you need to understand what happened 37 years earlier, in 1942. John Wayne wasn't always John Wayne, American icon. In 1942, he was Marion Morrison, a 35-year-old actor who'd been making westerns for a decade. Good ones. Popular ones. But nothing that had elevated him to legend status yet. And then Pearl Harbor happened. Suddenly every man in Hollywood was enlisting. Jimmy Stewart joined the Air Force. Clark Gable became a gunner. Henry Fonda served in the Navy. Across America, millions of young men were putting on uniforms and heading to war. John Wayne did not. He had 4 children. A wife. A contract with Republic Pictures that was worth real money for the first time in his life. And though he told almost no one this part, he had a punctured eardrum from a body surfing accident years earlier, a legitimate medical deferment. But legitimate didn't matter. What mattered was the image. Throughout 1942 and 1943, Wayne made war films. Flying Tigers. The Fighting Seabees. They were expendable. He played soldiers, sailors, Marines. He inspired rail troops heading into real combat. His face was on recruitment posters. And he stayed in Hollywood. The studio publicists worked overtime spinning the story, essential war effort through morale-boosting films, too valuable on screen to risk in actual combat, needed to inspire the troops from home. Republic Pictures even claimed, falsely, that Wayne had tried to enlist but been rejected for health reasons. It was all carefully constructed mythology. And John Wayne knew it was a lie. He watched his friends ship out. He read letters from men who'd seen his films before heading to Normandy or Iwo Jima. He attended Bond rallies where mothers whose sons had died overseas shook his hand and thanked him for serving. Every handshake was a knife. The worst part was that his own conscience wasn't even clear. Yes, he had children. Yes, he had a medical deferment. But plenty of men with children had enlisted. Plenty of men with worse medical issues had found ways to serve. The truth, the real truth he could barely admit to himself, was that he'd been afraid. Not of dying. John Wayne wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being ordinary. Afraid that if he went to war, he'd be revealed as just another man, not the myth he was building on screen. So he'd stayed. And he'd hated himself for it every single day since. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. The guilt ate at him through the 1940s. Through the 1950s. Through the 1960s. Even as his career exploded. Even as he became the Duke, the symbol of American masculinity and courage. Especially then. Because every role he played, the Marine sergeant, the cavalry officer, the war hero, was a reminder of the uniform he'd never worn for real. Every veteran who approached him with respect was unknowingly twisting the knife deeper. In 1949, he made Sands of Iwo Jima. He played Sergeant Stryker, a tough Marine leading men into combat. The film was nominated for Best Picture. Wayne was nominated for Best Actor. Veterans groups praised it as the most authentic war film ever made. John Wayne, who had never heard a shot fired in anger, was being celebrated for authenticity. The Academy Award ceremony that year was one of the worst nights of his life. He lost the Oscar to Broderick Crawford. But the loss wasn't what destroyed him. It was sitting in that audience, in his tuxedo, surrounded by actors who had actually served, Stewart, Fonda, Douglas, and knowing that every handshake, every great performance, Duke, was built on a foundation he didn't deserve. Only one person knew the full weight of what he carried. He'd told Maureen O'Hara in 1952, during the filming of The Quiet Man. They'd been in Ireland, between takes, sitting in her trailer while rain hammered the roof. Something about that moment, the distance from Hollywood, the grey Irish weather, the exhaustion of a long shoot, had broken down his walls. "I didn't serve," he'd said suddenly, staring at his hands. "Everyone thinks I did. Or that I tried and couldn't. But the truth is I chose not to. I was afraid of being ordinary." Maureen had looked at him for a long time. Then she'd said something he never forgot. "The war is over, Duke. But your war isn't. And until you make peace with it, you'll never be free." She was right. And for 27 more years he hadn't been free. Away from the cameras, Wayne made a choice no one expected. Now, in this hospital room in 1979, dying slowly of cancer, John Wayne finally understood what Maureen had meant. "I spent my whole life," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "trying to be worthy of something I was never brave enough to do. Every film. Every role. I was trying to earn forgiveness for 1942. Maureen's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. "I played soldiers and I played heroes and people believed I was one," Wayne continued. "And I let them believe it because it was easier than admitting the truth. That I was just a man who made a choice he regretted." He paused, gathering strength. The oxygen machine hummed. Outside the window, Los Angeles traffic moved through another ordinary afternoon. "You know what the worst part is?" Wayne said. "It worked. I became the symbol I was afraid I'd never be. The Duke. The American hero. And every day I wore that mask, I died a little bit inside. Duke, let me finish." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I need you to remember this. When they write about me, and they will write about me, They'll talk about the films and the characters and the image. They'll call me a patriot, a hero, an icon. He looked directly into her eyes. I need someone to know that I wasn't. I was just a man who made movies. A man who was too afraid to serve when it mattered. And I spent 50 years trying to make up for one decision I made when I was 35 years old. The room was completely silent except for the oxygen machine. Why are you telling me this? Maureen asked softly. Why now? Wayne's face shifted into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't carried so much sadness. Because you're the only person in the world I trust to remember the truth without using it as a weapon. You won't write a book. You won't give an interview. You'll just know. And when I'm gone, when they turn me into a monument, at least one person will remember I was human. But what followed would stay with everyone who witnessed it, forever. Maureen O'Hara did something then that she'd never done in 40 years of knowing John Wayne. She stood up, leaned over the hospital bed, and kissed his forehead. Not romantically. The way a sister kisses a brother. The way you kiss someone you love who's dying and there's nothing left to say except goodbye. You were braver than you think, she whispered. You spent 50 years carrying guilt that would have destroyed smaller men. You made that guilt into art. Into performances that inspired millions. You were never the hero you played on screen. You were something harder. You were honest with yourself, even when it hurt. Wayne's eyes closed. A single tear ran down his weathered cheek. That doesn't erase 1942. No, Maureen agreed. Nothing erases it. But it doesn't define you either. You defined yourself. Every role. Every choice after that. You spent 5 decades showing up. That's its own kind of courage. She sat back down, still holding his hand. They stayed like that for another hour. Not talking much. Just being. 2 old friends who'd shared screens and secrets, and now shared this final truth. Before she left, Wayne reached to his bedside table with his free hand. He pulled open the small drawer and removed something, a military medal in a worn leather case. A veteran gave this to me in 1968, he said, handing it to Maureen. After True Grit. He said I'd earned it more than he had. I tried to give it back. He wouldn't take it. Maureen opened the case. A Bronze Star. The citation was still inside, addressed to someone named Robertson, awarded for valor in the Pacific Theater, 1945. I've carried it ever since, Wayne said. A reminder of what I wasn't. What I pretended to be. What men actually did while I was on a soundstage. What do you want me to do with it? Wayne was quiet for a long moment. Then, keep it. And remember that the man who gave it to me thought I'd earned it by making him feel less alone. Maybe that's worth something. Maybe that's enough. Maureen closed the case carefully. It's enough, Duke. It was always enough. She stood to leave. At the door, she turned back one more time. You know what your real legacy is? Not the films. Not the image. It's that you never stopped trying to be worthy of something bigger than yourself. That's the most American thing there is. Wayne managed a real smile then. Small, tired, but genuine. Thank you, Maureen. Goodbye, Duke. She walked out. The door closed softly behind her. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. John Wayne died 19 days later, on June 11, 1979. The nation mourned. Presidents issued statements. Hollywood shut down for a day. The funeral was massive, patriotic, exactly what you'd expect for an American icon. Maureen O'Hara attended wearing black, carrying a small leather case in her purse. She never told anyone about that final conversation. Not in the 46 years she lived after his death. Not in interviews. Not in her memoir. Not to journalists who pressed her for the real Duke. She kept his secret the way he'd asked her to. Not as a weapon. Just as truth. The Bronze Star stayed in her possession until she died in 2015 at age 95. In her will, she left instructions. Return it to the family of Robertson. Include a note. The note said only, "A grateful man wanted you to know your father's courage mattered. It always mattered." When they cleaned out her home, they found one photograph on her bedside table. A still from the quiet man Duke and Maureen, young and strong, facing each other in the rain. On the back, in Wayne's handwriting, "To the only one who knew. Thank you, Duke." Hollywood remembers John Wayne as a symbol. A myth. An icon of American strength. One woman remembered him as something braver, a man who spent his life trying to earn forgiveness for being human. That's the legacy no monument can capture.